In 1963, a church basement in rural Indiana could seat 140 people at folding tables covered with paper tablecloths, and every one of those people ate for free. The food came from the kitchens of women who had been cooking since 5 in the morning, carrying casserole dishes wrapped in towels on the passenger seat, walking through the side door with both hands full and no expectation of credit. Number 22 on this list was brought by the same woman to the same church for 31 years straight, and nobody else ever attempted it because everyone knew it was hers. Number 13 caused a disagreement between two women in 1958 that was never fully resolved. And number 1, the dish that appeared at every church supper in every small town in America without exception, was so universally present that its absence from a table was considered a sign that something had gone wrong. These 25 meals were not cooked for money. They were cooked for the room. Hit subscribe. Let us count them down. Number 25. Deviled eggs. Every church supper started with a plate of deviled eggs sitting on the table before anyone arrived. Hard-boiled eggs cut in half, the yolks mashed with mayonnaise, yellow mustard, salt, pepper, and a shake of paprika on top for color. A woman could make 3 dozen in 30 minutes and transport them on a special deviled egg plate, a ceramic dish with oval indentations designed for this single purpose, which she kept in the china cabinet and used for nothing else. The paprika was not optional. It was the signal that care had been taken. A deviled egg without paprika was a deviled egg made in a hurry, and a woman who brought deviled eggs to church in a hurry was a woman who heard about it later. The plate was always empty before the main course was served. Children ate them by the fistful. Men ate them standing in line. Deviled eggs were the opening act that set the standard for everything that followed. Number 24. Ambrosia salad. Canned mandarin oranges, canned pineapple chunks, miniature marshmallows, shredded coconut, and sour cream folded together in a bowl and chilled overnight. The sour cream softened the marshmallows into something almost like nougat. The fruit released its syrup into the mixture. The coconut added texture. It was called a salad because calling it a dessert would have required putting it at the end of the table, and every woman who made it wanted it next to the main dishes, where it would be seen and taken seriously. Ambrosia divided church congregations into those who loved it and those who found it unsettling. There was no middle position. The marshmallows were the breaking point. You either accepted marshmallows in a salad or you did not. The women who made ambrosia did not care about your position. They made it anyway. Number 23. Baked beans. Not from a can. Church supper baked beans were made from dried navy beans soaked overnight, mixed with molasses, brown sugar, mustard, onion, and salt pork, then baked in a deep ceramic crock for 6 hours. The top darkened into a sticky glaze. The beans underneath turned creamy and rich, flavored by the pork fat that rendered down through the entire pot. A woman who made real baked beans for church supper had committed an entire day to the project, and the congregation knew it. The crock she carried in was heavy enough to require both hands and a cleared path to the table. Baked beans sat next to the main meats and absorbed their status by proximity. A spoonful of church supper baked beans tasted nothing like the canned version, and everything like the 6 hours of patience that produced them. Number 22. Fried chicken. Not one woman's fried chicken. The fried chicken. The platter that appeared at the center of the table, stacked in a pyramid of golden brown thighs and drumsticks and breasts, each piece from a different kitchen, each kitchen's recipe slightly different, and the congregation knew by sight whose chicken was whose. The woman whose chicken had the darkest crust used more pepper. The woman whose chicken was the crispiest, double-dredged in flour. The woman whose chicken was always gone first had a secret she would not share, and asking was considered poor form. Fried chicken at a church supper was not a dish. It was a competition conducted in silence, judged by which platter emptied first, and the winner never acknowledged her victory because humility was required and pride was expressed only through the quality of the crust. Number 21. Potato salad. Every woman made potato salad. No two women made it the same way. Mustard or no mustard. Pickles or no pickles. Eggs or no eggs. Celery or no celery. The variations were regional, familial, and non-negotiable. A woman from the Midwest put sweet pickle relish in her potato salad. A woman from the South used dill. A woman from the church's oldest family used her grandmother's recipe and changed nothing because changing it would have been a betrayal of the dead. Potato salad arrived in bowls the size of washing basins and was served with a slotted spoon that drained the dressing. The argument about whose was best never ended. It was not supposed to end. The argument was the tradition. Number 20. Scalloped corn. Canned creamed corn mixed with beaten eggs, crushed saltine crackers, butter and milk. Poured into a baking dish and baked until the top set golden and the center jiggled slightly when moved. The texture was between a pudding and a casserole, soft, sweet, corny, and rich with butter. Scalloped corn showed up at church suppers in the Midwest and Upper South with a regularity that suggested obligation rather than choice. It was the dish you brought when you were a new member and did not know what the congregation expected. Scalloped corn offended no one, impressed no one, and disappeared from the table at a steady, unremarkable pace. That dependability was its virtue. A church supper needed dishes that simply worked, and scalloped corn always simply worked. Number 19. Coleslaw. Shredded cabbage and carrots dressed with mayonnaise, sugar, vinegar, salt, and celery seed. Mixed in a bowl large enough to bathe a child and transported in the back seat of a station wagon with a dish towel over the top to keep the flies out. Coleslaw was the side dish that went with everything: fried chicken, pulled pork, baked ham, hot dogs at the 4th of July picnic. It was cool and crunchy and cut through the heaviness of every main dish on the table. The women who made coleslaw did not consider it glamorous work. They considered it necessary. Somebody had to make the coleslaw, the way somebody had to set up the folding chairs and somebody had to wash the tablecloths afterward. The coleslaw makers were the infrastructure of the church supper, and the meal could not have functioned without them. Number 18. Ham and cheese sliders. A pan of Hawaiian sweet rolls split in half, layered with sliced ham and Swiss cheese, the tops brushed with melted butter mixed with mustard and poppy seeds. Baked until the cheese melted and the rolls turned golden and slightly crispy on top. These appeared at church suppers, beginning in the late 1970s, and spread through congregations like a hymn everyone suddenly knew. The sweet roll against the salty ham and the sharp mustard butter created a combination that people ate 3 or 4 of without intending to. A single pan held 24 sliders and was empty within 10 minutes of being placed on the table. Women who brought ham and cheese sliders were asked to bring them again the next time, then the next, then every time. The slider became their dish the way a pew became their seat, claimed through repetition until ownership was assumed. Number 17. Chicken and dumplings. A pot the size of a small barrel, carried into the church kitchen by a woman and her husband because it was too heavy for one person. Chicken simmered for hours until it fell off the bone. The broth thickened with flour. The dumplings dropped in by the spoonful and steamed with the lid on. The pot was set on the serving table and opened like a ceremony. The steam rose. The dumplings sat fat and white on the surface. The broth was cloudy and golden and smelled like a kitchen that had been working since dawn. Chicken and dumplings was the main event at church suppers in Appalachia, the Midwest, and the Upper South. The woman who made it had earned the right to make it through years of attendance and contribution. You did not show up to a new church and volunteer chicken and dumplings. That was earned. Number 16. Jello salad. Lime jello with canned pineapple and cottage cheese. strawberry jello with Cool Whip and mandarin oranges, orange jello with shredded carrots and crushed pineapple. The variations were endless, and the principle was fixed. Jello mixed with things that did not belong in jello, molded in a ring pan or a casserole dish, chilled until firm, and served as a salad that nobody actually considered a salad. Jello salads were the most polarizing items at any church supper. Older women made them because they had always made them. Younger women ate them because refusing was impolite. Children ate them because they were sweet and jiggly and fun to poke with a fork. The Jello salad began disappearing from church tables in the 1990s, and the women who made them noticed and said nothing, and eventually stopped bringing them, and something irreplaceable left the table when they did. Number 15. Pulled pork. A pork shoulder smoked or slow roasted for 12 hours by a man who had been tending the fire since midnight. Pulled into shreds by hand, sauced or unsauced depending on the region, served on white bread or buns with coleslaw and pickles. The pulled pork was the only dish at a church supper that was typically a man's contribution, and the man who made it occupied a status in the congregation that had nothing to do with scripture. A good pitmaster was valued the way a good pastor was valued, for providing something the community needed and could not produce on its own. The pork shoulder cost about $3 in the 1960s. The 12 hours of tending was free. The smoke that clung to the man's clothes the next morning at church was the evidence, and the congregation smelled it and knew supper was going to be good. Number 14. Macaroni salad. Cold cooked elbow macaroni tossed with mayonnaise, diced celery, diced onion, diced bell pepper, salt, pepper, and a splash of vinegar. Chilled overnight. Served cold from a bowl that sweated in the summer heat of a church basement without air conditioning. Macaroni salad was the filler. The thing you put on your plate to take up space between the fried chicken and the beans. The thing you ate without thinking about it. The thing you forgot you had eaten until someone mentioned it and you remembered it was there. Its purpose was not to impress. Its purpose was to be enough, to take up room on the table and the plate and the stomach so that no one went home hungry. Macaroni salad was the most selfless dish at a church supper because it never asked to be remembered. It only asked to be present. Number 13. The dessert table. Not one dessert. The table. A 6-foot folding table covered with a cloth and loaded end to end with pies, cakes, cobblers, brownies, cookies, and puddings brought by every woman in the congregation who considered baking her ministry. Coconut cake, pecan pie, banana pudding, chess pie, German chocolate cake, brownies from a box and brownies from scratch, and the argument about which was better. The dessert table was the most competitive surface in the building. Women walked the length of it before choosing, evaluating each contribution with the precision of a judge. A woman whose cake was untouched at the end of the evening knew it, and the knowing lasted until the next supper when she brought something different and watched it disappear. The dessert table was democracy in action. Every woman's offering was given equal placement, the congregation voting with their forks. Number 12. Green bean casserole. Canned green beans, cream of mushroom soup, and French's crispy fried onions on top, baked until the onions browned and the filling bubbled. This casserole appeared at church suppers so often that some congregations had an unofficial limit, no more than 3 green bean casseroles per event. The recipe was on the back of the French's onion can, which meant every woman in America had access to it, which meant every church supper table held at least one and usually several. The women who brought green bean casserole were not trying to impress. They were trying to contribute, and green bean casserole was the contribution that required the least time, the least skill, and the least risk. It was the safe choice, and at a church supper, where a woman's cooking was on public display, the safe choice was sometimes the bravest one. Number 11. Banana pudding. layers of vanilla wafers, sliced bananas, and vanilla custard, homemade from scratch or made from instant pudding depending on the cook and the decade, topped with meringue or Cool Whip. Chilled in a glass dish that showed the layers through the side. Banana pudding was the undisputed king of Southern church supper desserts. A woman who made banana pudding from scratch, real custard cooked on the stove, real meringue whipped and browned under the broiler, occupied a position of culinary authority that no other dessert could challenge. The vanilla wafers softened overnight in the custard and turned into something between cake and pudding. The bananas darkened slightly, their sweetness concentrating. The meringue on top was toasted golden and wept slightly in the heat. Banana pudding was not just dessert. It was the final word. Number 10. Sloppy Joes. Ground beef in a sweet tomato sauce served on hamburger buns. Made in a pot the size of a small planet and kept warm on the church kitchen stove. Sloppy Joes were the church supper meal for youth events, vacation Bible school, and any gathering where children outnumbered adults. The sauce was sweet enough to appeal to every child and messy enough that napkins were distributed by the handful. A pot of Sloppy Joes fed 60 people for under $20. That economy made it the default meal for events where the budget was thin and the crowd was large. The buns went soggy, the sauce dripped. Nobody ate a Sloppy Joe without staining something. That mess was part of the experience, and the church ladies who scrubbed the tables afterward considered it a fair trade for a basement full of fed children. Number 9. Cornbread. Baked in a cast iron skillet greased with bacon fat, served in wedges cut at the table. The crust was dark and crispy where it had pressed against the hot iron. The inside was golden and crumbly and faintly sweet. Cornbread at a church supper was the bread that went with everything, from beans and greens to barbecue, chili, and stew. It soaked up pot liquor. It crumbled into buttermilk. It sat on the plate and absorbed whatever sauce or gravy drifted in its direction. A woman who made her cornbread in a cast iron skillet was announcing something about herself that required no words. The skillet was seasoned by decades of use. The recipe was her mother's. The cornbread was not negotiable. Number 8. Meatballs in grape jelly and chili sauce. Frozen meatballs heated in a slow cooker, with a bottle of chili sauce and a jar of grape jelly stirred together. The combination sounds impossible and tastes extraordinary, sweet, tangy, savory, and sticky. The meatballs were glazed in the mixture and turned dark and shiny. Served with toothpicks from the slow cooker, they disappeared faster than any appetizer on the table. This recipe, circulated through church cookbooks in the 1960s and 70s like a chain letter, passed from congregation to congregation, always received with skepticism and always validated by the empty pot. Women who had never made them looked at the ingredient list and refused to believe it worked. Women who had made them once made them for every event afterward because the pot always came home empty. Number 7. Potluck chili. A massive pot of chili made with ground beef, kidney beans, tomatoes, onion, and enough chili powder to fill a church basement with a smell that reached the parking lot. Served with saltine crackers, shredded cheese, and diced onion on the side. Chili was the fall and winter church supper standard, the meal that appeared between October and March at every congregation in the Midwest and South. Some churches held chili cook-offs where 5 or 6 cooks competed for a ribbon that cost less than $1 and carried more prestige than a trophy. The winning chili recipe was guarded with the same intensity as the fried chicken secret. The losing cooks adjusted their recipes in private and waited for next year. Number 6. Funeral potatoes. Hash browns mixed with cream of chicken soup, sour cream, shredded cheddar, and diced onion, topped with crushed cornflakes tossed in melted butter. Baked until the top was golden and the filling bubbled at the edges. Called funeral potatoes because they appeared at every post-funeral meal without fail, brought by someone who had heard the news and started cooking before the flowers were ordered. The casserole traveled well, it reheated well, it fed a crowd, and it asked nothing of the grieving family except an appetite, which it gently provided even when grief said otherwise. Funeral potatoes were not about the potatoes. They were about showing up with something warm when the world had turned cold. Number 5. Pulled pork and slaw on buns. The pulled pork from number 15 served on a soft white bun with a scoop of coleslaw from number 19 piled on top. The combination of smoky, sweet, tender meat with cool, tangy, crunchy slaw on soft bread was the church supper sandwich that needed no plate. You held it with 2 hands. The slaw dripped vinegar down your wrist, and the pork fell apart against the bread. This was summer, 4th of July picnics, homecoming weekends, end of school celebrations. The smell of smoking pork drifted across the church parking lot all morning, drawing neighbors who weren't members and children who hadn't been invited. Nobody was turned away. That was the rule. At a church supper, the food was for everyone who showed up. The pork stretched. It always stretched. Number 4. Chicken casserole. Shredded chicken mixed with cream of mushroom soup, sour cream, and a sleeve of crushed Ritz crackers. Layered in a dish with more crackers and butter on top. Baked until the crackers browned and the filling set. This was the casserole that new church members brought, because it was impossible to get wrong and required no reputation to pull off. The Ritz cracker topping was the great equalizer. It made every version taste buttery, rich, and crunchy, regardless of what was underneath. A woman who had never cooked for a crowd could bring chicken casserole and receive compliments and feel like she belonged. That belonging was the point. The church supper was not just a meal. It was an initiation, and the casserole dish you carried through the door was your invitation to stay. Number 3. Peach cobbler. Canned peaches poured into a baking dish. A batter of flour, sugar, milk, and melted butter poured over the top. Baked until the batter rose golden around the peaches and the syrup bubbled through in sticky amber pools. Served warm in a bowl with a scoop of vanilla ice cream that melted instantly against the hot fruit. Peach cobbler at a church supper was the dessert that ended the argument about what was best on the dessert table. The cobbler always won, not because it was the most skilled, because it was the most comforting. A bowl of warm peach cobbler with melting ice cream in a church basement on a Sunday evening was the taste of being somewhere safe with people who knew your name. Number 2. Pot roast. Slow-cooked pot roast with carrots, potatoes, and onions, sliced and served on a platter with the vegetables arranged around it and the gravy in a boat on the side. A woman who brought pot roast to a church supper had committed 5 hours of her Sunday to the meal before she ever set foot in the building. The roast was the main course, the thing the table was built around, the thing that signaled this was not a casual gathering, but an occasion. The gravy was made from the drippings and served in a gravy boat that matched the platter that matched the serving spoon. All of it brought from home because the church kitchen did not have anything that nice. The pot roast woman set her platter in the center of the table and stepped back and let the food speak. It always spoke loudly enough. Number 1. The table itself. This is not a meal. This is what happened when all 24 dishes before it arrived at the same place at the same time. The folding tables pushed together end to end. The paper tablecloths smoothed flat. The casserole dishes and platters and crocks and bowls arranged by the women who had carried them in, each dish finding its place through a system of seniority and tradition that no one had written down, but everyone understood. The fried chicken in the center, the sides flanking, the desserts on the separate table, the sweet tea in a 5-gallon jug sweating at the end, the paper plates stacked, the plastic forks in a cup. The pastor saying grace while 140 people stood with bowed heads, and the steam rose from the dishes, and the room smelled like every kitchen in town had opened its doors at the same time. That table was not about food. It was about a town feeding itself. Every dish was made by someone who lived within 5 miles of the building. Every recipe had been in someone's family for at least 2 generations. Every woman who carried a dish through the door had decided that this community, this specific church in this specific town, was worth cooking for. The food was free, the labor was free. The only cost was showing up, and the reward was a room where nobody ate alone and nobody went home hungry, and the table held more than any single kitchen could have produced on its own. That is what a church supper was. Not a meal, a miracle of coordination performed by women who never called it that. They just called it Wednesday night. And they showed up with a casserole dish and a purpose, and they fed the whole town. Every single time. Number 17, meatloaf with tomato glaze and green beans. That is 25 dishes from the church supper tables of small-town America. If you grew up sitting at those folding tables, if you remember the paper plates and the sweet tea and the dessert table that stretched 6 feet long, put the name of your church in the comments. Share this with someone who still makes one of these for every gathering. And subscribe, because those tables are getting smaller, and somebody should remember what they held when they were full.